All right, speaking of Tyrese Maxey and the partnership, we had our questions, and he answered a lot of them during the regular season. He was partnered with DeAnthony Melton for a pretty good part of the season before Melton went down with his injury, with the back situation that kept him off the floor for a really good portion of the season. So with Maxey on the season, he averaged 26 points, 6 assists, and shot just under 38%, but he put up the most three-pointers on the team at about 8 a night. Well, definitely 8 a night for the 76ers. He played in 70 games. He's in conversation to be an All-NBA consideration, first-time All-Star. We thought that there was an arrow pointing up for him because of the work that he puts in, what he has shown on the floor, the development every single season, knowing that this kid works to be better. Always talking about the 1% better. Joel Embiid always backing him and praising him publicly about how he's the franchise of this team. But Kyle, knowing that he was going to get better, did you expect him to get this much better in year number 4, All-Star, All-NBA consideration, looking at him to carry a team because your number one option is so banged up that you needed him to step up, where, again, one of our shows going into the postseason was, is he going to be able to level up here in this spot? How much of this did you expect? How much were you surprised, if at all?
So I did say I thought he's going to average 25 points a game prior to the season. So I don't think the scoring alone was, like the scoring jump was that surprising. You take a high volume player in Harden out of the backcourt, give the ball to Tyrese more. I think the scoring jump was going to happen one way or another. But as I said a few days ago, I think every time we try to put a ceiling on Tyrese, he just breaks through it. And I think he's proof positive of, we go into every draft, right? And I would imagine, even though more than likely they'll trade this pick.
Yeah, we'll talk about some prospects that none of us believe will suit up for the Sixers.
Yeah. But one of the things that's so difficult about the draft process is it's hard for us to know, like you can hear, oh, this guy's a hard worker and blah, but there are levels of hard work.
Right.
And Tyrese has set the standard for hard work from the second that he jumped to the league. And so guys who were his peers, who were close to him, ahead of him, maybe a little bit behind him, but had a case for, yeah, they'll be better than Tyrese long term. He has flown past a lot of these guys. And every time I think, well, he can't have another big improvement, right? Like he's going to be limited in this way. He adds something to his game. It's not, they're very different players, but it's not that dissimilar from Joel, where we would say, how much better does he get offensively? And then he adds the operating from the elbows. At the end of this season, he's hitting threes. I think Tyrese even said after last night's game, Joel goes in the offseason, says, I'm going to do this, comes back. And his example was he hit a jump hook out of the post in an important possession in game 6 last night. And I think we see a very similar pattern with Tyrese, where all the time, even within seasons, we're seeing, okay, there's the mid-range game. Mid-range game is working for a couple weeks stretch there. And the challenge that Nick Nurse laid out for him after the game and after the season had ended was, you have to be 24/7 committed to being one of the great ones. And his challenge is to average 30 a game was the number he brought up. There are not many moments or many games where you get to take your foot off the gas or you get to have a tough night. And so figuring out the counters, not to say that he doesn't do this, but taking care of yourself off the court with the sleep habits, with diet, with everything that goes into that, and just your day-to-day habits have to add up to, I can be a guy who scores 30 every night, who dominates every night, and there is no team that can throw something at me that I'm not prepared for. And frankly, I think if we're looking for, and this is a whole nother show, but I think if we're looking for, how does Tyrese get there? How does he go from another level up this season to the next one? It's going to be dissecting the coverages and diving so deep into the film that when teams throw these gadget looks at him, when they double him and all that, he already knows how he has to beat them. And that's something that frankly only comes with experience. And I think, and he's said this publicly, that 2 months without Joel, where he had to be the guy, he's at the top of the scouting report, he's the alpha dog, they're throwing the kitchen sink at him. That might be the most important part of this whole season for the franchise from a long-term perspective, because that gave Tyrese a taste of what he saw in the playoffs against the Knicks, what he saw in Game 6, that frankly, they stopped him. They froze him out for most of that Game 6. And that's going to be an important lesson for him to carry forward, that if his history in the league is any example, I think he's going to take that. He's going to apply it to his work this summer. And I think he comes back yet again a better player next year.
What stood out for you? Something that maybe you didn't expect from Maxey coming into this season. You gave your prediction in the beginning, but was there something that really stood out to you that said, "Oh, okay, I didn't know he was going to get there so quickly"?
I mean, this isn't like something that stood out because it's new. It's just he has gotten to the point where he is one of the elite of elite in the world. That step back jumper is freaking lethal.
100%.
And when you have a guy in Joel Embiid who has so much gravity as a screener and as a DHO guy, having that skill set in his arsenal is difference making. And he has every shot in his arsenal. Like, he can come off of a screen, he can stand in the corner and catch and shoot. He can come running off of a DHO. He can hit the step back. He can hit the pull up. He has all of it. But that step back off of the screen is, I mean, that's unguardable when those two are on the floor together. And his playmaking got better. It's not where it needs to be. It might be the kind of thing where he makes incremental upgrades each year, and it gets to the point where it's like kind of sort of good enough, but still frustrates you at times. Like, I think they could certainly still use another creator, not just because you need more passing, but also to help get Tyrese some easier shots, because he does live on a very tough shot diet. But I think his passing made a step, and people will hear that and say, well, it's not good enough. And it's not good enough to be an elite lead guard, that's for sure. And the offense did function better when they had Kyle Lowry out there for stretches because they had another more natural point guard. But it still got better. Like, it went from where it was, not yet where it needs to be, but it's somewhere in the middle now.
Yeah, he's
and honestly, like, his biggest improvement was probably defensively. Like, we'll focus a lot on his offense because that's what makes that duo special.
That's probably right.
Defensively is where he improved the most. I think,
and it's a shame too, because we talked so much about it during the regular season, and he got beat a few times by Dante DiVincenzo with his head turned too many times, especially in Game 6, where DiVincenzo got some easy buckets, bodied him a little bit in those spots right there underneath the basket. And seeing Maxey compete and fight and try to match that physicality, that was a little disappointing to see in that moment. But it's one that he now gets to learn from and move forward to get better in that spot.
I think to that point, Devon, I think that is probably what Nurse was getting at to some degree, right? Like, offense was a slog for him in that game. And I think it was an example of, he's done a good job of not letting one end of the floor bleed into the other for the most part all season. But that was an example of, he's having a tough go of it on one end, and then he just was not there. He was checked out on some defensive plays. And I'm not going to sit here, like, after he literally saved the season in Game 5 and had the year he had, I don't need to sit here. None of us need to sit here and say that was a bogus effort from Tyrese and blah, blah. But that is how thin the margins are in the playoffs. You do not have the luxury to turn your brain off. And if it was a role player, if it's, the Kelly Oubre's, the Tobias Harris's, who I'm sure we'll talk about him before the show is over, if that's them doing that same thing, getting back cut by DiVincenzo, people are going to be killing them. And so he needs to hit that level. He did for a lot of this season. The second half of the season, to Derek's point, I'm glad he brought up the defense. There was a noticeable improvement from him in terms of the buy-in, the play-to-play success, off-ball awareness, so on and so forth. But that's going to be critical going into next year. We'll see how good he is on that end. That's something that I think, because the fight is there, that's the most important thing. He's never going to have the measurables that some of these guys have. It's also why this offseason is so important. You want to have somebody in the backcourt with him who rounds out the backcourt with Melton was a good fit with him, although he's a little smaller maybe than you would want there next to Tyrese. But they need somebody who's a a defensive ace that they can put next to him.
Yeah,
so the burden's not as high.
That length and size that Oubre had with him out there on the floor, you prefer that a little bit more in that starting role, because if you give him that type of player next to him, then sure, it takes so much off of him, where his defense though is magnified playing with that type of player with that length, and he doesn't have to take one player versus the other. And that energy that he does exert so much on the offensive end, it comes back down on the other side. And Melton picked up a lot of that slack. Mm-hmm. And Kelly Oubre did do that. Nick Batum also there late. Kyle Lowry certainly did the same thing. But when we're talking about adding that, when you guys were pointing out the best lineup was the big lineup. Kelly Oubre with
Batum and
Tobias and Joel Embiid out there with Maxey. That's what you want to see going forward. And he has taken a lot of those steps. The guy to be an all-star in year number 4, where we were watching the game last night, so many people were talking about, or even seeing on social media, yeah, Grant Hill, you're doing the game. Are you a little upset that you didn't add him to your Team USA? That's how good he was. Or the franchise, as Derek was talking about, is no longer Joel Embiid.
Grant Hill had that moment with Brunson last night, by the way.
Yes, he did. So that's where it is with Tyrese Maxey. So to kind of round that part of the conversation up, who knew? 21st overall pick a couple of seasons ago. Now this guy is the other face of the franchise with Joel Embiid, and that's how good he is. He's gonna get maxed out this summer, and rightfully so with what he is gonna get.
We all silly like the mayor.